Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Agile Institute series. I'm Beth Gregg from the Agile Institute, and today we welcome back Erin Glanz. Hey, Erin.
Hi, Beth. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Today we'll talk about co-design sprints, and many of you out there in the audience may have been invited to or participated in one of our co-design sprints throughout the organization in the past few months. So we thought it'd be a great time to give you all a little bit of background. What really is a co-design sprint? Why do we do it? And what does success look like? And also what you can all expect if you're an attendee or invited to a co-design session. So first, let's start with really what is a co-design sprint? A few key points from my experience include that every co-design session will be different. Each one has the potential to improve engagement, create demand, and establish teams through an approach that allows the stakeholders to be part of the solution and maintain autonomy. There's value in coming together in person, away from our offices and usual environments, to meet and collaborate with colleagues with a shared purpose. There's also intentionality with every step of the way in the proposed sequential process we'll talk about in a few minutes. The other key point is to personalize the experience, making sure that we are together in our planning process, deeply understanding the opportunity we're working on together and what our goals are. Erin, any other comments on what co-design sprint means to you?
I think you highlighted it beautifully. What I would add, though, is really in its simplest form, a co-design sprint is really just time and space with the necessary or impacted individuals to really come together to solve a particular problem. So you're bringing everyone together, time and space, and usually it's more than just a normal meeting. So when we think about meetings, right, we do an hour, 30 minutes here or there, and then next week you have the same meeting again, and you're like, sometimes it's Groundhog's Day, right? You have to rehash, but the beauty of a co-design sprint is really that dedicated time and space. We're talking 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes an entire day, depending on the scope of what you're trying to solve for or create demand for.
Thanks, Erin. And you mentioned, getting everybody involved. And so now we'll talk about what planning a co-design session looks like. Who are the everyone? How do we know who to invite, what to include, what are our goals? So maybe you can help us walk through your planning phase.
I think the biggest element that you have to focus on is really identifying who is the owner, who's that executive sponsor, who's really steering the ship, whose problem it is owning, right? Who are they? What are they doing? And then the other piece to that is really deeply understanding whatever problem or whatever opportunity is that you're solving for, and taking a conversation with them and really understanding, what is this going to look like? What are you trying to solve for? What are we not doing within the session? Because you'll find a lot of times that a lot of different elements, we do scope creep, right? There's a lot of times where you get in a room and you try to solve all the problems at once. We want to really define what that problem is. And then the other piece of it is really understanding who needs to be there and making sure you're getting everybody involved that's necessary. So having a really diverse group of anybody who could potentially be impacted. So you can talk up to maybe 20 people in the room at any given time when you're thinking about this planning process, and understanding those stakeholders really deeply. How do they feel about this problem? What are they, have they been trying to crack this for 2 years now? Is this brand new? Are they coming in super energized? Where do they feel in relation to the problem? And I know you've done a ton too, Beth, so I'm curious to hear, what's your experience of planning? My number one thing is just really deeply understanding that problem and then doing some of that, stakeholder analysis.
I echo your sentiment about deeply understanding the opportunity we're trying to improve or the problem we're trying to solve. I tend to be an optimist, so I like to frame it as this opportunity for us all to improve together. Additionally, I would add deeply understanding why we are coming together as a team. What is that minimal viable goal for the session itself? And in order to understand that, you really need time and space with the executive sponsor. You mentioned that. Who owns it? So identifying the executive sponsor, spending time with them to understand what their goal is, and also allowing shifts in how you're going to get there. So throughout the planning phase, you may have an idea in your mind about how the day will go. And when you hear from your attendees or stakeholders, you might find that you'll have to pivot and shift. But as long as you're not losing sight of that minimal viable goal set by your executive sponsor, it's all right, because ultimately, as the facilitator for these co-design sessions, we're not controlling how the day goes. Rather, we're there to facilitate a conversation. And the other piece is assuring that the attendees feel they all have a voice and that they're participating together in the room. When I say the room, I think, we do virtual co-designs, we do in person, and I would like to point out here that there's power in getting together in person and hearing from one another, pulling those common threads and really digging deep into that associative thinking so that the attendees in the room walk away with that bond in a way that they have this in common and they're here to work on it together. So long and short, I would echo the sentiment on really deeply understanding the opportunity and also clarifying with the executive sponsor what their goal is. Lastly, I'll add clarifying what your role as the facilitator is. That's really important. It could look different. So is our role as the facilitator simply to run the co-design? Or do we take an additional step and follow up and kind of facilitate the follow-up meetings or organize the sprints that come out of the discussion, right? So that's really important too to clarify in the beginning. We always want to check our assumptions on what the role and responsibility is of that primary facilitator.
I completely agree. And I think another element to that, and I think where we could go with this discussion is sometimes when we reach out to these stakeholders, they're like, hey, what is this, right? What can I expect when I'm attending this? And another key element to the planning step that I like to utilize is just having Q&A sessions, right? Just drop in sessions where stakeholders can come on. They can talk through, what is this? And we can give them a really firm explanation on what we're attempting to accomplish within the designated time, get them really comfortable with the elements of the day and the free-flowing nature, right? We're not going to have a very strict agenda. As you mentioned, we want it to be a discussion. We want it to be free-flowing. So with that being said and keeping that in mind, offering that opportunity for them to clarify, get comfortable with the concept, and then sometimes even doing a little bit of pre-work, right? Having them really do some research or understanding. A lot of times if you're being engaged for a co-design sprint, it is because you are a subject matter expert. So we don't want to spend too much time on the homework, the research. We recognize that a lot of what needs to happen in the room is already in your brain, right? You live it, you breathe it every single day. So that's a really critical piece that I want to just highlight in the planning part of it as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to highlight as well, you mentioned understanding the attendees. And so kind of going back to agile science and some of what we've discussed in previous series episodes is how to intentionally understand your attendees. So do a little bit of network mapping to understand who are these attendees, who are they connected to, what communities are they members of, and of your attendees, who is a messenger. The messengers, remember, have to have influence. They need to understand the community they're a member of and bring back that information to you. So it's really important that as the facilitator, you take time to think through the connections of the attendees and what motivates them. So that way you can leverage those things, that information you have in your back pocket to assure an engaging conversation during the session.
Could not agree more. And I just want to give a quick shout out to our platform here at HMH. The HMH Standout tool is incredibly helpful for understanding deeply the stakeholders, right? Just that assessment that we take, it gives so much insight. And then even taking it a step further to understand, what has their history been with whatever the dialogue is going to be. It'll give you some insight as that facilitator to really navigate that conversation in a meaningful way.
Right. So the other thing, sometimes co-design sprints or sessions are planned with others. One thing I've learned in my experience is one group may be very engaged and want to be part of that planning phase. But that doesn't mean that that translates to every group. So I would say check your assumptions as the primary facilitator. Inquire with your group if anyone has that interest to help you plan, and let them be part of that planning, because again, giving them that opportunity for their voice to be heard is really powerful. I know I've learned a lot from the people that I've worked with in planning these sessions, and I've taken those lessons learned as key points for successful future sessions.
I love that, changing up the messenger and even doing a little bit of co-design prior to the actual sprint.
Exactly. All this collaboration to assure that it's not just coming from one silo, one person, rather the group as a whole. So to take us back, I just want to highlight some of the key points we mentioned. A co-design sprint will look different every time. One of the main benefits is to build engagement or demand. It's important as a primary facilitator to deeply understand the opportunity we're trying to solve, and spending time and space with the executive sponsor to assure that there's absolute clarity on the minimal viable goal, allowing for changes in how we get there.
I'm curious to hear, based on everything that we've outlined around these co-design sprints, what does success, or what has success looked like for you and the sprints that you've ran?
That's a great question. Simple metrics around things like attendance rate and level of engagement from the attendees, just observing the body language and how the attendees are participating in the session can give you some initial feedback on whether or not your co-design session is a success. So as an example, your attendance rate is, I don't know, above 85%, right? Majority of people who were invited show up, and they show up in a positive way, right? They're not completely skeptical about the time spent, and there will be skeptics in the room, and that's okay. But having that positive energy in the room, I think, is one way to measure the success of the co-design. Especially, maybe you'll start out skeptical, and oftentimes we will because this is so new. But if you end in that positive note, that's a real, I think, defining moment where it's been a successful co-design sprint. Some ways we can measure that: we could do an emotional footprint. That's one of the tools in our toolkit as agile change conductors, right? And that's just asking your attendees to give a number from -10 all the way to +10. Give them some kind of scale. -10, this was awful. I wanted to leave early. I'll never come back again. +10, wow, that's amazing. I feel really engaged about this opportunity. Excited to be here, would come back. No questions asked. And you can ask them to give the number. You could also ask them to complement that number with just 2 simple words. Don't overthink it. Always ask them to write it down, though, first, so they're not influenced by what each other is saying, right? So that's a simple way to go around the room, just one idea. Additionally, we capture metrics, including a Net Promoter Score, right? So we ask them to kind of rate how likely they would recommend this type of session to others within the organization. And that's another simple metric that we can just pop a QR code on the screen, ask them to take a survey. The most powerful way, though, in my humble opinion, is when your attendees come up with wanting more time and space together, whether that's a one-time meeting in the future to follow up, or maybe they come up with a cadence. Maybe they ask you, hey, we want an hour every month to continue to come together because they see the value in that collaboration. That's a successful co-design session. What about you, Erin?
I mean, I'll build upon what you said. I could not agree more. There is nothing more exciting than you have individuals walking in a little skeptical about the process or what they're doing there. And then by the end, you see them really flip to that fan mode, right? Where they're like, this is great. How can we do more of it? And where does this lead to next? I think another easy way to look at it, like what does success look like, is really around, did we accomplish that minimal viable goal? Did we leave with that tangible piece of information, whatever it was that executive sponsor was looking to get out of the session? If you got that, that's success, right? And then that engagement piece, in my mind, is also an added bonus, right? Are people willing to give time and space moving forward to really drive that change or whatever you're looking to accomplish post-session? So I could not agree more. I love that you really looked at that objective little data points within the session. I think it's sometimes hard to really look at things, objectively, but if you see people leaning in or you see people smiling or nodding their heads, even if they're not verbally communicating it, you can start to pick up on those subtle nuances that says like, okay, this is a successful session. We're really getting somewhere with these individuals. And I wouldn't say, to your point earlier, right? Like, I think feedback's really important within the session. So if you're seeing, lack of engagement, somebody keeps stepping out, or you're not being valuable with that individual's time or multiple people, I encourage people within these sessions, really call it out, understand what the need is and what's not being met, so that you can really utilize that time and space to get to that minimal viable goal. So when I think about what successful looks like, it's everything you outlined. And then in addition to that, being able to say that you accomplished that minimal viable goal and are leaving with what you needed to, that you outlined with that executive sponsor.
Thanks, Erin. That's an excellent point. I would add additionally, one key lesson learned for me is to intentionally keep your ears open and eyes peeled for that skepticism before the session starts, right? You have time to check in with that individual, hear from them on what their feelings are around it. Or maybe you have other facilitators in the room with you that can share the feedback with you. Hey, I heard from someone in the back of the room that they really wish they did not accept this meeting. They can't believe they drove all the way here. They're missing other meetings and time away from their office. They have 1,000 other things to do. It's important to address that skepticism right away. So in the past, if I'm aware that there's that skepticism out there, I call it out before we get started in the opening comments for the session. Hey, we recognize how busy you all are. We recognize that. We thank you for the time. And it's a really good lead-in to also outlining our kind of rules of engagement, right? We always share those in the beginning of a session. We're here to collaborate. Your participation is expected. We're not here to shoot each other down. We're here to reframe it as an opportunity to solve the problem we're here to work on together, right? So it's a nice way to kind of lead into what the expectations are for the day. You are invited to the co-design session intentionally because your voice is valued and you're seen as a subject matter expert. So bringing yourself and your experience, having an open mind. This meeting looks different from our typical meetings, right? Wear something comfortable. We're going to be here for a while, right? This isn't just a 45-minute in and out. We're here to engage and participate. So come prepared to participate. You may be asked to join breakout sessions, get up, move around. Usually, depending on the length of the session, we might provide some food for you. It depends. So typically in the invitation or in the Q&A sessions, we'll outline what the time will look like, whether it's a 4-hour or a full 8-hour day. So I would just say come with an open mind. Bring yourself and be ready to participate and share your expertise in an environment that fosters collaboration in a foundation of psychological safety.
Could not agree more. I think it's incredibly important to come, prepared and just bringing your mind, right? Being ready to be there for a certain amount of time, showing up your full self, ready to engage, have those dialogues. So I could not agree more.
The other point I think I would add, it's so important if you're facilitating a co-design to make sure everyone, the attendees, even your co-facilitators, have clarity on that MVG. So I always open with that anchoring purpose. This is why we're here today. This is what we'll be doing. And keeping any presentation you have to a minimum. We're not here for a presentation, right? We're here to collaborate together and have a meaningful conversation, whatever that looks like, depending on what you're there to work on together.
Yeah, no, I love that. And to that point, sometimes I'll even, as a nudge to the group, leave up what the goal is for the day, right? Just making sure in that environment it's very clear to everyone that this is what we're here to do. So again, it's not going to be a presentation heavy type experience. It's going to be a heavy discussion. We're going to do a lot of interaction between groups. Sometimes, as Beth mentioned, it could involve breakout groups, but sometimes it's one larger group, right? And you're probably thinking, how are we going to get 20 people to talk? But with that amount of time and space, a lot can happen. And it's a great way to engage and really hear from all of those subject matter experts.
Yeah, you mentioned nudge, and I wanted to mention it's so important. One lesson I learned, a nudge could be decorating the physical space. And initially I thought, decorations. Do we really need that? But it is a powerful way to align the physical environment in a way that engages people in alignment with that minimal viable goal. So I've had a lot of fun in previous sessions working together with co-facilitators to really create an environment that fosters that collaboration. And I think it's something that shouldn't be overlooked in the planning phase, something to have an open mind to.
Completely agree. I think another really great element, recognizing that it's so much time and space we're taking. We've utilized fidget toys, right? It's hard to sit still. It's hard to be focused. It's hard to not feel the need to pick up that phone and check and scroll just because that's the normal thing we do. We do something with our hands. So having, fidget toys around so that people can still do what they need to do, but really engaging and being part of that discussion. Really great point. I think always think about that environment and how can we cultivate an environment of collaboration to really get to that minimal viable goal.
Right. So as an attendee, to summarize, all you need to do is show up, bring yourself, be comfortable and prepared to participate. As a facilitator, there are a few things administratively that you need to iron out. Bring the fidget toys, consider decorating or altering the physical environment in a way that aligns with your minimal viable goal. Thank you so much for joining us, Erin, to talk about co-design sprints. You've done an extraordinary job pulling stakeholders together. It's really interesting to hear how you approach it and really learn from you and kind of discuss different key points that we've learned over the past several months through our experiences. Co-design is a great way to build engagement and demand with your stakeholders and to establish teams around an aligned purpose and goal to achieve together.
Always happy to be here, and especially talking about something that we've been so ingrained into and continue to iterate on. So thanks again, and looking forward to additional co-design sprints with you.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we look forward to sprinting with you in the future through the HMH Agile Institute. For any questions or inquiries, please feel free to reach out to us at the Office of the CQO at hmhn.org.